And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can y'all, is it sharing right now? Is that,
I don't think we're seeing anything.
okay, let me see if I can do this again. There. Is it there yet?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, we're going to do a quick program overview and a recap of some of the financial resources terms and definitions, I'll call it. And we're going to do this as a kind of a light description of each one of these, but certainly we've got panel experts here today that I'm excited about and we'll introduce in a second. We'll really talk about some top tips about thinking about cultural projects and real estate and types of financial resources that are available and or could be available. And then we'll do some question and answer. So please use the chat if you have specific questions, both about the program and the financial resources. I am thrilled to be joined, and because I'm sharing my screen, have a harder time seeing everybody. So please, if you put your hand up, I believe I can actually see that through the magic of Zoom. But in case of anything else, I'll be also checking the chat. And I'm going to have Mike, Pam, and Catherine briefly introduce themselves to the group. You can wave your hand or unmute. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Nellis. I'm the CEO of the Austin Community Foundation, and we are a 45-ish-year-old institution here in Austin. We represent about 1,300 philanthropists in the region, and we deploy capital through a variety of different vehicles, mostly into the Central Texas region. About 80% of our grant making and programmatic work stays right here in Austin. And the tools that we typically use are, traditional grant making that you would think of through a foundation, but also we use program related investments. So typically concessionary debt to a variety of different institutions. And in my past life, I was the CEO of the Think REIT and was lucky enough to be part of that building project. So I've got a little experience being on the other side of this.
Great, Pam.
Hello, Pamela Benson Owens. I am the CEO of Six Square, Austin's Black Cultural Arts District, and we serve as a bridge in the district to Black creatives, artists. We work on preservation and conservation in terms of preserving the culture that was once a thriving environment on the east side of town. And we do that in a variety of ways, by way of education, by way of economic development, by way of cultural uplift. And I've been in that role now 3 years. But I'm a longtime Austinite and have grown up in the area and look.
Great, and hello everyone. I'm Catherine Groves. I'm with Capital Impact Community Development Financial Institution. We actually recently combined with another organization called CDC Small Business Finance, and they're the nation's top SBA lender. So we're launching a transformative new enterprise as sort of a family of companies, if you will, if you can see from my Zoom background here. But together we are about $3 billion in assets under management. And our goal is to provide economic and community development at scale, centered around people and place. So we do this through lending, investing, and programmatic activities. And I lead our community development real estate lending for the Western region, covering our core geographies of Texas and California. I am based here in Austin, also from the Austin area, from Round Rock, actually. So we focus in the areas of healthcare, education, affordable housing, and other community development. Our lending ranges from pre-development and acquisition financing to mini-perm financing, so 7 to 10 years, as well as some longer-term financing. We generally work with nonprofits or mission-driven for-profits. We lend off our balance sheet and also leverage specialty financial products, such as market tax credits or other special purpose funds that we create. Our average loan size is about $4 million, again, real estate secured primarily. Minimum loan size is $1.5 million. And we recognize that kind of everywhere we work, we're sort of part of a community development ecosystem. So in each place, we tend to kind of plug in where it makes sense and just kind of grow and from there. So really excited to be here today and be a part of the conversation.
Great, thank you all. Really fantastic resources for projects that may be originating out of the cultural trust or already existing out in the ecosystem. And thanks for mentioning that word. I think that's critical. I wanted to briefly go through the fundamentals of let's see here, there we go. Oops. So we are in the cultural trust and we are starting and want to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of the program for those who don't know, but it is this request for proposal process that is about to start has been in a registration process for the past month, and it is intended for arts, culture, and music organizations to secure permanent affordable space in the city. Certainly, this has been a work in progress for many years, talking about the advocacy and the need for secured affordable space. But this solicitation is really a bricks and mortar opportunity to secure that physical space in terms of a development project. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Ann Haynes, the CXO of the Austin Economic Development Corporation, and will be the project manager for this Austin Cultural Trust effort. Really, the program priorities are fairly straightforward. Again, facilitating the acquisition and preservation of these potential projects to secure permanent affordable space for organizations, really developing a public infrastructure of cultural spaces, music, arts, and culture, really to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really spending a lot of time looking at addressing past inequities experienced by underserved and underrepresented groups in Austin through the facilities that we develop and the organizations we support. Providing the permanent affordability is the end goal. And then certainly through this process, creating a sustaining pipeline of projects that we can both advance and help facilitate as funding sources continue to become available in this and future rounds. Again, this is so much more important than focusing on just each individual project, and each individual project will be unique as we work with it and work with the organizations, but the pipeline is really critical for demonstrating the need for this infrastructure, and certainly something that we are focused on helping accelerate. It's also very important to us that these are portfolio of assets in the cultural infrastructure, and that we're really focused on the places that surround and connect these projects. We have, I'm going to describe the money sources in a second, but really there are two tracks: those to support existing organizations and existing venues that are in operation, and supporting probably through this process 1 to 2 in this early round based on the available funding. We are also looking to develop new spaces that would be potentially supporting 4 to 6 organizations sharing 2 ADC managed spaces. Both types of projects really will reflect a portfolio of different types of organizations and uses and a diversity of geographies throughout the city. And we certainly would love to do more than what we're talking about here, but because of our current funding sources, we anticipate these early investments to really be demonstrations of how we can continue to build out this project pipeline. We have 3 identified funding sources. The Creative Facilities Bond, which was passed in 2018, provides $12 million towards permanently publicly available spaces that are preserving, restoring, acquiring, or constructing spaces for the arts, culture, and music of the city and organizations. We have one source of fundings from the hotel occupancy tax, which is called the Iconic Venue Fund, 2.4 million, which is really dedicated towards venues that are currently operating, are iconic venues, but maybe in sort of a dangerous place with either leases or expenses that are getting out of the control of the organization. And we want to keep them within the landscape of our cultural arts and music ecosystem. And then City of Austin has a total of $15 million over a number of years, the initial $2.5 million available, again, for the Iconic Venue Fund. And one really important thing about this these potential projects is we are looking for proposals based on what arts organizations want to provide and secure as permanent affordable space. We will be your partner in looking at how these different funding sources apply to that program and what additional funding sources need to be brought to the table, which is the subject of today's conversation. We have been in this process for about a month. The registration portal has been open. We've received a number of registrations already. And we are trying to set up a continuous series of technical assistance work sessions and open office hours to be able to support projects as they advance through the process. We will have an RFP hopefully available as early as next week. Putting the final touches and translating into Spanish and really trying to get the word out that registering is the first step, and then the application, which is the request for proposals, would be available. We will have two deadlines, one which is an early deadline in December 17th. That is for a number of projects that have been advancing over the last few years and certainly have some real due diligence issues that we really want to start helping that organization work through and certainly get evaluated across our scoring rubric relative to the program priorities that we have. We certainly have a longer time frame, and the final deadline of this round is March 31st. And know that especially given the new developed spaces that might be great spaces for organizations that don't have a particular space in mind but are looking for affordable space, we will do some matchmaking and review with those projects and potential locations in the spring prior to that final deadline. The registration portal is here. The program information can also be found on austinedc.org/cultural-trust. Really, the registration form is simple. It's just contact information, a selection of a track. Are you an existing or a new venue, or you're just interested? We certainly want to keep this list of contacts as a distribution of information list. You will not, your names will not be shared with others. It's a matter of just trying to keep a list of people to keep updated on the program. You can identify some basic technical assistance needs, and we'll continue to structure workshops to help suit some of those needs. And then certainly it is important to register to be able to receive the online application invite. The RFP itself as a document will be posted on the website and available for view, but the online application will be invitation based on the registration. We don't need you to have all the answers. This is really important for this program. We are providing these work sessions as a way of walking through information that may be discussed or be a part of a conversation about a formal either acquisition, real estate project, or potential future facility, but is not for you all as an organization or operator to be experts in this field. We will assemble experts as we go to help facilitate these projects, and then certainly try and tee you up for success, whether or not you become an investment of the cultural trust, especially in its initial round where we have limited funds. I just wanted to briefly go through some terms. And again, I'm going to do this relatively quickly and very simply with my own explanations, but I want our panelists or others to add some information if I need to, and then we'll get to some tips from our experts today. These are some basic sources, financial tools that might come into play on your potential projects, and as well as terms that might be helpful during this process specifically. I think there are standard commercial banks, and especially because the cost of capital has been quite low for a while, they really are often a partner, especially local banks, with a lot of the nonprofit and for-profit operators in town, and certainly are always a source of both acquisition financing and construction financing. Community Development Finance Institution, Capital Impact Partners being one. There's probably others on the call today, but these are chartered by the Federal Department of Treasury, and certainly working at the nexus of real estate and community development. Really looking at, again, having different types of loan products. I think Catherine will be able to speak a little bit more about this in her tips, but they also do everything from acquisition, construction loans, and often new market tax credits, which I'll talk about in a second, as well as providing some unique funds towards either pre-development activities or other types of organizational capacity grants and loans that might be available as well. Each community development finance institution, CDFI, is different. And certainly, like a bank, it is important to develop relationships with them. Private philanthropy, that can come in a number of different ways, different formats, family foundations, there are corporate philanthropic efforts, as well as community foundations like we have Mike here today. Social impact investor and funds. These are investors that obviously, as an investor, want a return for their investment, meaning a financial return, but often look at trying to achieve mission goals or social impact. And this can be sort of funds that are created almost as a portfolio fund or something that is direct investment to be able to achieve social impact return, which could be everything from environment, health, to culture, arts, and other kinds of things that are not your typical financial return vehicle. And Mike, you will do a better job explaining that in terms of what you've been doing. Program-related investments and mission-related investments. Many types of organizations, including foundations, do two types of investments. They'll do program-related investments, which is a much more, in lieu of a loan, typical loan product or typical grant, they would actually make an investment for a particular return over a particular period of time. Often it's more patient capital over a longer period of time, but is directly tied to the mission of that particular foundation. Mission-related investments really sit at the level of an organization's endowment, and how they might typically invest their endowment will be in typical, Wall Street type investment vehicles. But using a mission-related investment mindset really allows them to invest very directly that endowment, not into necessarily as much local activities, but funds or other types of corporations or REITs that in fact also share the same mission. Pre-development loans and grants, that's something important to ask for cultural organizations to see if there are availability for those types of activities, any kind of feasibility, looking at the planning of a potential future project. Often if you are a potential candidate for a future loan, there may be organizations that provide those loans and grants. Organizations, that's a national organization, LISC, which I don't believe has a strong presence here, has that type of organization. It's a nonprofit finance institution, can support those types of things. And again, I'm new to the Austin area. There may be folks that are doing those now, and maybe our panelists can speak to that. Bridge loans or bridge finance is a concept that actually may come about in this process. And it is often when there is committed and specifically approved public funding that may be available, but not available at an immediate need. And the organization or the operator or developer has an immediate need. Often financial institutions will provide a bridge loan for a very short period of time, to knowing that the ultimate payback of that loan will be available shortly. And that's something that we can take a look at on certain projects as we look at how these public funding mechanisms for the cultural trust will be available. Philanthropic donations, obviously that is important to many nonprofit organizations specifically in terms of being able to support something as big of a real estate project, probably needing a capital campaign. I wanted to just mention this as a carrot I think given the cultural trust funding, certainly the ability to say that, there may be funding in a cultural trust program for an organization, it's a nice carrot to be able to potentially raise some additional private donations alongside it. New market tax credits and opportunity zones are federally based programs that provide financing, very complicated financing for projects that are in specific qualified census tracts that generally include low to moderate income folks or employment of low to moderate income folks. And certainly they are the ability to kind of close the gap on certain projects that may have a financial gap. They do require certain kinds of uses. Cultural, depending on the cultural project, it may or may not apply to those types of things, but it is two tools. And again, I think Mike could speak a little bit to new market tax credits, could apply in some cases to projects. Crowdfunding is something I have some experience with. That's never a huge amount of money at the moment. There are many real estate crowdfunding portals out there that have been attempting to raise significant funds for projects, but it is something that both allows an organization to build engagement through small dollar donations leading up to something that might be a larger pool of money for doing a project or even doing a fit out of a particular space. And I don't think it should be dismissed too easily, because I think those types of opportunities are rising. And then CSAP, I wanted to mention the Economic Development Department's program, which I believe, and actually, Kim, you're here, cultural space program, cultural space arts program, assistance program, I think. Essentially, those are smaller dollars, and there have been a few rounds with, I believe, another one coming out. But these are critical dollars that could actually help sort of bridge the gap that you may have in your current facility, and certainly would be a tool in the tool bucket for doing your projects. I'm going to move on briefly, but did any of the panelists have anything on those terms they wanted to add before I move forward? If not, they can do it in their remarks. These are some process terms that might also come about in the RFP that I certainly wanted to just flag, and again, talk about it in question and answer if there's some questions. But really, deal structure and capital stack we spoke about last week in our real estate panel. Really, we're looking at each and every proposal as a potential and viable project, and we will look at the way in which the monies will come together in what's called the capital stack, or how the deal is structured, which has a lot to do with different positions within that capital stack, as well as what the agreements might be between all of those different types of funding that make up the project, because certainly there's legal aspects to that, there's time frame aspects to that, and then there's also any potential obligations of the borrower and or receiver of that real estate project that would come through that deal structuring conversation and process. Relationship development I mentioned before, but it's really important that with any funder or lender, that relationship between the organization and that entity is critical, and it often starts well before you're asking for money. And I think that's just really important to note, because you want to be able to figure out what your portfolio of options might be to look for funding for a future project in mind. Often, especially in a lending capacity, collateral is really important, and that is what type of asset can you pledge toward a value towards the potential loan. That could be ownership of a site. It could be a certain kind of equipment that generally has a market value. Certainly in a different thinking process, collateral could also mean the type of investment you would make or co-investment you would make to a potential project. Due diligence is something that we would be doing as a matter of this program and process, and really looking at the viability of a project and what kind of unanswered questions there might be about an organization or potential funding sources. But the funding sources themselves would do their own due diligence. That is usually, sometimes it can be concurrent processes, but ultimately there is always time that is required to really look at a potential loan or deal from multiple different vantage points. Underwriting is a key piece of that, which would be ultimately the I don't want to call it technically the guarantee, but it ultimately is the final, I would call it, and maybe Catherine, you can speak to that, but essentially it is a really significant piece of securing that loan or that financial instrument for the long term. So I always find it as one of the last steps, although you start pretty early on reviewing and verifying it. But most important for anybody with any financial instruments, including the organization, there is risk in these projects and exposure to both the organization and potential lender or community organization that might be granting or lending. And that is important to look at during this process from all vantage points. And I just want to emphasize, including, a risk to an organization that, having gone through COVID, you don't know what's around the corner, and making sure that you are adequately prepared as an organization to take on risk, and what are you exposing financially and legally by agreeing to certain terms. Term really just meaning from a length of time, and each of these financial instruments may have a different term associated with them, not just the lead up time to secure them, but ultimately the term from a short term to a longer term investment, and what types of returns and or expectations those financial tools have. Finally, default and loan workout. I don't want to speak about them because none of that's going to ever happen in any of these projects, but certainly on the horizon of any loan or financial vehicle, including, I think, a grant. If you're not meeting your expectations, there's default and a process by which you work out, and really the long-term effect of having to go through those processes. So it is something to be mindful of. There are probably 100 other terms that could be addressed here, but I want to move it to our advice from our panelists with essentially, I'm going to actually for this process take off the presentation and see if we could have 5 minutes or 5 top tips, could be any amount of time, from Mike, Pam, and Catherine. And I guess just for the purposes of ease, I'm going to go in that order. So Mike, if you'd like to start.
Sure, I'm happy to. I guess I'll start by saying you should probably talk to Catherine and Pam. They are much more experienced and a lot smarter than I am about these topics. And so, but I'm happy to sort of give my own thinking on it. So a couple so I was the CEO of building the Thinkery and had to put together the capital stack for that project. And we started it in raising capital at the sort of height of the big recession. And we're in a position where we had to think really creatively about how to put together financing for a $20 million project, which at that time I kind of was like, whoa, how are we going to get $20 million together? And so the idea of having a variety of sources of funding was really, really important to us. So I would say if you're thinking about doing a project and really looking at debt, start real early talking to Catherine about what that project is going to look like and what the financing concept is. And if you're going to think about adding in some philanthropic support, start really, really early talking to Pam about that and putting together a very good and very realistic fundraising plan that includes a variety of different sources. And then adding in an earned income concept is, I think, on the operating side is really important too, but not having too much earned, as we've seen through the sort of pandemic, that what once was the sort of holy grail became an Achilles heel for a lot of organizations. I think when it comes to philanthropy, and again, Pam, this is her space. Philanthropy is really tricky, and it's really tricky in Austin. In the cultural space, there is no institutional funding source that specifically focuses on arts and culture. And so that early relationship building with funders is going to be really, really important. And thinking about sort of high net worth individuals as funders is going to be a really important part of your fundraising strategy as you build out your your capital stack. I would say that talking to CDFIs early and often as you try to put your deal together is going to be important. Each one works really differently than the other. So capital impact partners may think differently about your project than LISC, then may think differently about your project. The TSHAC may think differently. And so a one size fits all approach from a CDFI perspective probably isn't going to work. But I would say don't be afraid of debt. Lots of nonprofits are terrified of debt. And I think folks like Karen have done a really good job of sort of managing the concept of debt on projects. And there are lenders in this community, from traditional banks to community banks to CDFIs to individuals who and foundations who are willing to think really creatively about how to debt finance a project over a long period of time. Typically, they're not interested in being the sole funder of a project. They want to see a variety of different sources, from philanthropy, other lenders into the project, et cetera. And then I think most importantly for us when we're looking at a project to finance is thinking through, great, you can get the project built. I think almost anybody can get a project built, but how does it get sustained over a period of time, right? And what do the relationships look like that are in place? What is the operating model that sustains the organization over time? Typically, there's not a lot of collateral in place for financing these types of entities. And so you're sort of building on the operating model and you're lending on the strength of the balance sheet of the organization. And so really thinking through what is a solid operating model once the organization is up and running. So I'll stop there for now, unless there are any specific questions about like the foundation space here in Austin and how it thinks about cultural entities.
Just Mike, my only request is that you make a much better description of social impact funds and social impact investing.
So it's a big space with a lot of definitions, but what I would say is you sort of have a couple of different buckets. One is which you mentioned, which is sort of the mission related investments, and really that is making an investment from an entity that is looking for a market rate return, right? So if they're saying I'm gonna invest in real estate and in your project, they're looking for a similar type of return profile that they could get by investing in any type of commercial real estate venture here in the region. So that's a very difficult threshold for most nonprofits. There's sort of the PRI space, which is a program related investment, which is kind of where we play. We consider it kind of concessionary debt. We're looking to fill a real specific space in a capital stack that can unlock other dollars and make a project happen. It's typically kind of, Catherine, you probably know the latest rates, but it's in that sort of 2-ish to 3-ish% debt capital, 7 to 10 years of term is sort of typically where PRIs sit. And then you have sort of typical venture philanthropy, which is sort of much more amorphous. And it is, we're going to create an investment. We're going to essentially invest in your fund, and we're going to do a sort of private equity-like investment into your project. And we expect a return on that investment. Each deal is separate and individual. But again, it's more on the market rate side as opposed to the concessionary side of the equation.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. That was
Yeah.
much better. Follow that. Okay, so thanks. And Pam, you're there somewhere. Okay, so you're square.
I mean, whatever and all that Mike said. Hey, Abby, what Mike said and brilliantly done. I don't even have much to add because he hit all the good things. I will say, though, from a perspective of being in this city and the fact that the culture and art space is so interesting by way, I would definitely say some of the work that needs to be done in our organizations is to practice not assuming constraint, right?
Mhm.
Team lately, like, oh, whatever you think it is, that's not it, ask anyway, right? So when it comes to how we are trying to really onboard equity, the city has done equality, the city has not done equity, new space, right? So as we're practicing our way in equity, then it becomes the opportunity to work on putting ourselves in spaces where we maybe haven't traditionally been, and not assuming the constraint of the donor or the entity and what they will not do. So I think it's an opportunity to, when you put up the slide about all the tools, my advice would be touch all those tools.
Mhm.
Like every last one of them, diversify, 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 depend on not one sole source.
Mhm.
And that becomes really important. And that you get some muscle strength around the no and learn the lesson in the no and lean into, maybe we need to think about how we're telling the story about our work. Does that actually touch tourism? What are our value adds? Maybe what should we not be doing anymore? Should we do 3 things instead of 50 things? Like, I think it becomes a really great exercise in like really defining what is the work that you're doing, what is the project you're bringing forth, and how you will talk about that work, right? The big really is in the small. It's a great
I love that.
exercise and a great opportunity to step back and go, what is it that we are doing? How are we doing that? How do we define cross-cultural partnership? Do we say we know of Abby or do we really know Abby? Do we know of Mike or do we really know Mike? So the relationship piece becomes important in that space, and actually getting quiet enough to hear the answers to some of these things, and to learn about maybe the space been in. The other thing I will say is, even though I think it's hard, and I will be the first to tell you that we have not done well in the town and the city that I love when it comes to creating access, that we have a real opportunity to assume positive intent in all these spaces, as a lot of initiatives are coming forward to do the best in trying to support and do the work differently. We're not where we want to be, but we might not be where we were. And so assuming positive intent in this space is important, on down to, if there is something that you are seeing in the process that really speaks to being exclusionary or not, being a bridge to making things accessible, we got to say those things. And we don't need to say those things in the parking lot and in the meeting after the meeting. We need to say those things in those work sessions, and bring that conversation forward with courage. And some people are going to say to me on the side, why does it always have to be us? Because it's time to get the work done.
Mhm.
Sorry, not sorry. Let's bring the conversation forward and actually talk about it. So I think all of what Mike said stands, and those are just a couple of other tips, but truly, truly, whether it's preservation, whether it's acquisition, whether it's a cultural arts program or project that you're trying to bring forward, think about what's actually possible, and start talking about the work in a way that will truly be a value add to this process that the Cultural Trust is bringing forward. I mean, I cannot say that enough. I think people come into the space and decide it can't happen, and I really think it can. And so I want us to think about how to do it, and how to partner and how to collaborate, and how to do the work. And then finally, once you get out in the space, how to sustain it, right? So beginning with the end in mind, like, okay, we've got it, but how do we sustain it in a way that's reasonable, that's doable, that creates a value add for the community. So those are my general tips, and those aren't things that I'm asking other people to do. We operate in that every day. We at Six Square lift ourselves in that space every day, and so we're not just throwing out some textbook stuff. We actually try to operate in those things and practice those things and fail fast in those things and get back up and come back to the space and try again.
And Pam, just as a brief, because you wear many hats, but on top of it, you've had experience on the fundraising side and kind of needing fund side. So just as a quick tip to, I would say, organizations or boards, how do you put on a hat of fundraising and then ultimately develop, assuming that relationships are key to that, how do you start getting out there to get to know who out there may be able to help the organization? Where do you start? How do you look for potential partners?
That's a great question. What I would say, yes, I sit in many hats. I raise it for others. I teach fundraising. And what I would say is the first step is there's always an assumption that you can't do it, that it's uncomfortable, that it's hard, and it's all those things are true, and it's doable. And so when I talk to organizations and boards, I always say, first of all, you just have to practice doing it. You have to put yourself in positions to tell the story. And if you don't feel like you're good at telling the story, get good at telling the story, and get comfortable with telling the story, and taking ownership of the work that's being done in a way that should be a natural part of what you do. Somebody said to me a couple weeks ago, gosh, sometimes when I see you coming, I know what's going to happen. Great. No surprises. I'm down with the community. So you are absolutely right. I am absolutely coming up the middle, because we need financial support, because organizations are not founded and built on dreams alone. It takes money to run. So I think we should demystify that and stop talking about that like it's some kind of voodoo. We need money to run. Money is not a bad thing or a dirty thing. Money is the access point for which we get to do the work. And so I think we should be forthcoming and talking about that. So you have people on your board that are like, I absolutely don't like fundraising. Oh my goodness. Let us find you an advisory capacity. Because up in here, we're raising money. And to just mystify that and take the stinger and the stigma out of that, I think is really important. And then creating a space for people to get training and access to the ways in which they feel comfortable doing that. But you do not get that for which you do not ask, and that you do not go to this table and talk about passionately, and that for which you don't believe in. So it's really important. Again, when you're in the work, sometimes it's hard to talk about the work. We practice talking about the work because we're so close to it. Like, what are we saying? Is that congruent with our mission? Oh my gosh, we shouldn't say that again. That is not aligned with who we say we are. So I think a check on your identity as an organization becomes important. And I know nobody wants to hear this, but maybe it's time for you to address that mission statement. Maybe it no longer stands up, and you might need to tweak it because times have changed and it no longer serves exactly the work that you're doing.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's great. Some questions will come possibly at the end, even from me. But Catherine, thank you for joining.
Great. Hard to follow these acts, but I will, just provide some insights, kind of from the angle of looking for a loan from a CDFI. So in terms of kind of top tips, I mean, first, is just really having your financial house in order, just kind of, clean audited financials or CPA reviewed financials, depending on sort of where you are, what kind of organization you are. Even as nonprofits, just, showing positive net operating margins, because if you're going to take on debt, you're going to need to demonstrate that you can support that debt through cash flow. We also, just understanding your operating model, that earned income or earned revenue model that Mike was mentioning. We do kind of look at how much, kind of getting into this like financial feasibility of both your organization and your project that you're looking to finance. We're looking into your track record. So kind of really digging into those revenue sources and seeing, you know, how reliant are you on fundraising? And if, you know, we have various benchmarks, but somewhere between 50 to 75% like earned revenue is helpful for us because we can kind of demonstrate that you have that track record of, you know, securing government contracts, or you have a fee for service, or, you know, it's just more reliable income potentially. On the other hand, if you know, have a significant portion of your revenue does come from fundraising, you know, what is your track record in fundraising? You know, who supports you in those fundraising efforts? So we just kind of dig into all that, but it's really all around that financial feasibility of your organization and of your project you're looking to finance. And it kind of leads into, you know, what we mean by underwriting. It sounds, you know, kind of like a foreign term in many ways, but, you know, we're really just looking at your organizational and financial health, you know, your project, if, you know, if we're financing a capital project, which is the majority of the work that we do look at collateral like a bank. So, you know, you buy a house, you get a mortgage, and the bank has a lien on your house. So, you know, similarly, we would take a lien on real estate. But we also with equal importance, look at the cash flow of your organization to support the proposed debt. So, you know, we are not in the business of making loans that can't be repaid, and we don't want to ever saddle somebody with more debt that they can afford. So you know, we're a nonprofit organization. We don't succeed unless you succeed in your business. So it's really important to us, you know, to go through that underwriting, not as a barrier, but really as a, you know, do we all feel really good about what we're proposing here, and does it make sense for the project? We're also, in addition to all of that, looking, you know, really into the management team and your development team. So, you know, who's at the table, you know, who's leading the organization, who are the major parties and partners. If you're doing a capital project, you know, who's managing your capital project, you know, what consultant groups are you using, what general contractor are you using? You know, we really dig into all of that. So I wanted to just comment, you know, what the Cdfi difference is, you know, in that kind of this sort of lending relationship. So one, you know, we really approach our relationship as a collaborative partnership. And often we're not the only ones that are part of that partnership. There are other sources of financing or funding at the table that contribute to the project getting done. We do have a wider credit box. So what that means is that we are looking at credit in a more holistic way and not just in a box with numbers. We have the ability to, you know, to do that, to think outside the box, if you will, because we're not the same as a regulated bank. We don't have the same types of regulations. So we're able to operate with more flexibility. We have a greater tolerance for risk, what perceived risk, and we don't view risk the same way as maybe a bank would. And we also have some access to specialty financial products that we have mentioned previously. We set up, you know, particular funds. We, you know, have access to federal programs like new market tax credits and others. So it's, you know, it's just sort of a player in the mix, if you will. Some other things to highlight, I'll kind of cruise through these. I mentioned the development team. You know, most nonprofits, you all have day jobs. You're running arts organizations and you're amazing. And I couldn't run an arts organization. So, you know, don't think you need to know everything. You know, build your team. And I know that sounds like, well, where do I start? You know, leveraging board members, community organizations, and, you know, if you can afford it, mission aligned consultants to kind of help you through the process, because any of these projects take a village to get done. So get support. If you're doing a construction project, I also recommend getting, you know, if you're going down the road where you're really trying to manage a construction project, definitely getting someone to manage that project on your behalf with an owner's representative. to really serve as, it just takes a lot of work and you need to focus on your day job. So I know that it all sounds very expensive, but in the end, I think you wouldn't regret it. And then let's see, and then finally, as everyone has said, pursue a variety of sources of funding or financing. Debt is just one tool and it does need to be repaid. So most of the projects that we work on involve a number of players in the capital stack, using all the words that Anne mentioned earlier, but philanthropic funding, public funding. I know that this doesn't make your jobs easy, and that's true. But I think, as Austin continues to develop this ecosystem further, I think, we're getting closer to having just more aligned tools at the table to help get projects done and really impact the community in ways that are inclusive and equitable. I'll stop there.
That's excellent. And I think I just wanted to highlight what you said before about a collaborative partner. And I think even with commercial banks, typically local banks with local representation, I think it's really important to know that as scary as it might be to unload all of your financial documents and your, all the sundry details of, especially in the last 18 months, but the idea is it can be actually a great learning opportunity for an organization to start to look at, I think a relationship with a bank or a lending agency starts to bring out issues or questions that as an organization you need to look at. But I think just as a collaborative partner, you are not just, sort of the wall of no information and submit documents and you'll get spit out a response. It's really an iterative process. I won't speak for you, but I assume that it is. Great. I think that one of the things I just wanted to recap on, because we've got about 5 more minutes, is really about this program specifically. And I think since we have fewer people in the audience today and they'll be reviewing later, I think questions that come in to Anne at austinedc.org are perfectly welcome, and we can certainly provide answers as a part of the RFP process. But to highlight what everyone has said today, and including with this program, we are not expecting applicants to this program to be experts. We are here as the Austin Economic Development Corporation to help connect the dots and find the resources that you might need to advance your projects, and certainly look to the experts that we have here today to start to see what are the different tools that might be the most viable for your project. In many cases, when the cultural trust investment will be a part of a project, we'll certainly be at the table with you. But there are other projects that may go forward without cultural trust funding for many different reasons. But there's certainly the same tools that are out there in the universe still exist for all of the organizations that might be watching this. And I think that our goal in the next couple of weeks, actually, as a request for proposal comes out, is trying to make that a little bit clearer in terms of what piece of the financing or the funding would the cultural trust funds be. In almost all cases, it will not be the 100%. So almost every project will need multiple sources, just as was said earlier, which is very typical on any cultural arts, nonprofit, or music venue development project. They all require multiple sources. I tend to think of it like lasagna, like literally all of those layers. And the key is to make sure it all gets into the plate or the dish at the same time and in the oven, because otherwise every single one of those layers is a little slippery with time and stickiness with different regulations. But it's our goal as an ecosystem to help put them together and advance the project, and again to support that permanent infrastructure for cultural arts and music. I had a couple of questions identified for clarity. You do not have to have all of your financial resources for a potential project secured in order to apply to the program. It's really important that you start to talk about work you have done or questions that you do have. And really this is focused on your space needs and what type of spaces do you need, what type of location have you identified if you have, don't have to, and what condition of, is it your existing place and do you currently have a lease? is much more important than have I figured out the 5 different tools I need to be able to secure this building. You do not have to have necessarily experience having taken out loan or raising money to participate, but certainly we will ask those questions of organizations, and then certainly track record of doing that will help towards some of the financial tools that might be considered. And then I think preparing as an organization, you heard Pam speak about that, really get comfortable telling your story and what you're trying to achieve and what you've been able to do is probably the most important DNA strand in this entire equation, because we, again, want to preserve your use, your existence in the world, not necessarily you as a real estate developer. So I think that those are just basics on the program, and I want to just open it up for any last words from any of the panelists, or specifically if there's any questions out there. I just know that a lot of friends and family here on the call today, so I'm not sure how many questions we have, but any final words or comments? Not at this time, that's okay. But I think this is the first of a few of these types of sessions that we'll continue to have. And I really do thank everyone for their time today. I welcome feedback for what might have been covered or should have been covered or might be covered in the future. So Ann@austinedc.org. And thanks very much for everyone's time.